They were meant to disappear. Two sleeping children in a wicker basket, left to the mercy of a river. Their father, a man of wealth and reputation, called it mercy, a necessary erasure of a scandal too costly to cure. But fate had other plans. From the forest emerged a white mare, as silent as snowfall, as relentless as love. And when the river tried to swallow what man had discarded, nature answered with a guardian no one expected. Before we dive deeper, let us know where you're watching from, and if you love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe. It was an oppressive autumn morning in the rugged mountains of Montana. Dense fog lay heavily upon the Bitter Root Valley, thick and suffocating like a funeral shroud. The quiet murmuring of the river was the only sound beneath the thick blanket of mist, which hovered gently over the water like a ghostly veil. From the distance, the muted hum of an engine broke the silence. A sleek black Range Rover navigated sidily along a muddy, leaf-strewn path, each crunch of its tires disturbing the heavy quiet of the forest. There was no music playing, no conversation. Inside the vehicle, silence was as cold and tense as the landscape outside. Behind the wheel sat Richard Kane, his knuckles pale as they gripped the steering wheel, his jaw tight, eyes devoid of warmth. At 47, Richard was a prominent businessman from Helena, accustomed to control and power. His crisp white shirt, impeccably pressed without a single wrinkle, reflected his meticulous nature. The polished face of his Rolex glittered briefly as he checked the time repeatedly, an anxious habit that betrayed his growing unease. Behind him, on the back seat, lay a large wicker basket, covered with a gray blanket. Inside, two 4-year-old twin boys, Michael and Gabriel, slept deeply. Richard himself had carefully administered a mild sedative earlier that morning, ensuring that neither child would wake prematurely. They were his sons, though he'd rarely ever acknowledged it, even to himself. The boys had come into Richard's life through a fleeting romance with Lila Harper, a talented but struggling pianist whose music had momentarily softened Richard's usually hardened heart. Their affair had ended quickly, overshadowed by Richard's ambitions and his upcoming high-profile marriage to the governor's daughter. The unexpected pregnancy had been an inconvenience, and Richard had swiftly withdrawn all support, emotionally and financially. But the twins presented an even bigger problem now. Gabriel, the younger twin by mere minutes, had been diagnosed with a rare and severe congenital heart condition. Urgent surgery was required, along with a blood transfusion. Gabriel's blood type was AB rare, a rare group shared only by Richard himself. However, the idea of exposing his affair, of drawing his own blood or investing significant money into saving the child, was unbearable to him. Instead, Richard had quietly removed both boys from the hospital, under the pretense of transferring them to specialized care elsewhere, fully intending never to return them to any medical facility. Richard did not hate his sons, though he felt little affection. His true motivator was fear, a gnawing dread that these children might someday threaten his carefully constructed public image and his meticulously planned future. Richard had convinced himself that this quiet disappearance was merciful, far kinder than allowing them to suffer publicly, entangled in scandal and scrutiny. As he parked the Range Rover at the end of the muddy trail, Richard hesitated briefly. A final glance in the rearview mirror showed the innocent faces of the sleeping twins, features strikingly similar to his own. With a heavy sigh, he stepped out, his expensive leather shoes immediately sinking slightly into the wet earth. Richard carefully lifted the basket from the vehicle, handling it with a strange, detached tenderness. As he walked toward the river's edge, he placed the basket gently on the ground, its base touching the edge of the cold, slow-moving water. Richard stared down at the sleeping twins, his expression wavering slightly for the first time. A sudden flutter of movement caught his eye, as Michael briefly opened his eyes, blinking slowly as if trying to recognize the blurred figure above him. Their eyes met for a fleeting moment, and Richard felt a sudden, painful constriction in his chest. Memory surfaced unbidden. A rainy night when Lila had arrived desperately at his doorstep, soaked through, pleading for his help. "Please, Richard," her voice echoed in his memory, frantic and broken. "They're your children, they need you." But he had refused her then, just as he had convinced himself he must refuse them now. A surge of emotion, regret, perhaps even guilt almost overtook him, but Richard was practiced at suppression, his cold logic quickly regaining control. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the sleeping children, the words barely audible and heavy with unspoken remorse. Without allowing another hesitation, Richard nudged the basket forward into the gently moving river. It drifted slowly away from the shore, carried downstream by the current. Richard turned sharply, refusing to watch further. The quick steps back to the vehicle seemed heavier than before, each step sinking slightly deeper into the mud, imprinting his guilt deeper into the earth. As he climbed into the Range Rover, his hands trembled slightly, betraying the turmoil beneath his carefully controlled exterior. As the black vehicle disappeared into the thickening mist, silence returned to the riverbank. Moments later, a different sound disrupted the stillness, a loud, clear whinny resonating from the opposite side of the river. From the shadows of the dense forest emerged a magnificent white mare, her coat gleaming in the dull light, her eyes deep and strangely knowing. The horse stood poised for a moment, ears pricked forward attentively, then moved decisively into the water. With graceful, deliberate steps, she waded through the icy current, never taking her eyes from the wicker basket now floating dangerously further downstream. The river's pace quickened and the basket bobbed precariously, one of the boys inside coughing weakly in his sleep as cold droplets splashed over the edges. Reacting with instinctive urgency, the mare pushed strongly through the water, muscles rippling beneath her silvery coat. She reached the basket just as it tipped dangerously, water spilling over its sides. The mare seized the woven handle firmly between her teeth, tugging with extraordinary strength and determination. With effortful strides, she guided the basket back toward the safety of the shore, finally pulling it onto solid ground. The twins remained asleep, unaware of the miracle that had just unfolded around them. Solace, as the mare was known to those who had seen her roaming freely through the forests of Bitterroot, stood protectively beside the basket, her breath steaming lightly in the cool morning air. Far away, Richard sped down the road toward Helena, refusing even once to glance back through the rearview mirror. He gripped the wheel tightly, attempting to steady his shaking hands and racing heart. For just a brief instant, doubt flashed through his mind, a silent question about the fate of his abandoned sons. But Richard swiftly crushed that tiny spark of concern beneath the crushing weight of denial and self-preservation. As his vehicle vanished into the fog-laden horizon, he left behind 2 innocent lives and 1 extraordinary creature, quietly stepping forward to right a terrible wrong, guided by instincts that defied logic and transcended understanding. The Bennett farm lay nestled in the low, rolling hills near the edge of the Bitterroot forest. On that particular autumn morning, it appeared deceptively serene, wrapped gently in the early mist. Dew glistened upon the blades of tall grasses, and a lone rooster's crow echoed softly, marking the reluctant start of a new day. Sarah Bennett hummed quietly to herself as she pinned a fresh batch of linen to the clothesline, the damp fabric flapping gently in the breeze. It was in the midst of this peaceful routine that a strange, sharp whinny pierced the quiet. She froze, her hand suspended midair, heart suddenly alert. The sound was unfamiliar, unlike any of the animals they owned. "Tom?" Sarah called urgently, dropping a wet sheet back into the basket at her feet. Tom Bennett, who had been repairing the fence behind the farmhouse, heard the urgency in his wife's voice and came running. "Is ya?" he asked breathlessly, arriving by her side. "Listen," Sarah whispered sharply. Another whinny resonated from the river's direction, echoing through the still morning air. Both Sarah and Tom moved instinctively toward the source of the disturbance, their minds racing with possibilities. Perhaps a wild animal caught in a trap, or someone stranded by the riverbank, but nothing prepared them for the surreal scene awaiting them at the water's edge. Through the thin veil of lingering mist, a magnificent white horse stood knee-deep in the river, dragging something bulky toward the muddy shoreline. Tom instinctively reached for the small hunting knife at his belt, his mind wary of the unknown animal. Sarah grabbed his wrist gently, stopping him. Tom looked, her voice shook as she pointed toward the basket being pulled ashore by the majestic creature. Tom followed her gaze and gasped softly. Lying in a sodden woven basket were 2 small children, their skin pale and tinged blue from the cold, damp air. The horse nudged the basket carefully onto solid ground, then stood vigilantly beside it, never once removing its gaze from the precious cargo within. Sarah was the first to move, surging forward and dropping onto her knees beside the basket. Her breath came rapidly as she lifted the soaking blankets, revealing 2 young boys, no older than 4. One child's breathing was shallow and irregular, while the other seemed almost lifeless, barely responsive. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling with urgency and fear. Her years as a nurse surged to the forefront of her mind as she assessed their vital signs swiftly. Gabriel's pulse was faint, his lips tinged with blue, while Michael's breathing was weak but more stable. She quickly retrieved the small first aid kit she always carried and began administering emergency care. Sarah performed chest compressions, gently but firmly, her whispered encouragement blending with the quiet desperation in her movement. As she worked, memories flooded her, sharp, painful memories she'd kept buried deep within. Twice before, she'd experienced pregnancy losses, once heartbreakingly at 24 weeks, another at 3 months. Each loss had etched permanent scars upon her heart, wounds invisible to the world but painfully raw to her. Not this time, she muttered fiercely under her breath as she pressed down rhythmically on Gabriel's small chest. Tears streamed unchecked down her face, mingling with the sweat and river water. "You will not die today. Not on my watch." Tom watched silently, standing protectively behind his wife. He felt helpless, witnessing Sarah's determined struggle between life and death. He cast his gaze briefly toward the horse, that remained still, observant, its presence oddly comforting rather than alarming. Finally, a weak cough broke the tense silence. Sarah stilled, her breath caught painfully in her throat. Gabriel's eyelids fluttered and a soft cry escaped his lips. Sarah released a sob of pure relief, pulling the boy tightly against her chest, cradling him fiercely as if her embrace alone could anchor him permanently to the realm of the living. Tom exhaled slowly, his eyes damp, voice thick with awe. "She saved them before we even knew they were here," he said softly, acknowledging the remarkable horse, still standing patiently by the shore. Sarah nodded silently, her heart too full for words. She gazed at the children, their fragile forms now safe in her embrace. Softly, as if the names had always been theirs, she whispered, "Michael and Gabriel, 2 angels returned to us." Tom smiled gently, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Strong names," he said quietly, approvingly. "They suit them." Sarah's eyes turned once again toward the horse, which had remained perfectly still, its wise, dark eyes fixed steadily upon hers. A strange sense of calm overcame her, and without knowing why, she murmured gently, "Solace. Your name is Solace. You are the comfort someone sent to us." To their astonishment, the horse nodded slightly, as if in silent acceptance, then calmly stepped back beneath the shadow of a tree. Its posture remained vigilant. After carefully bundling the boys in dry blankets, Sarah rose carefully, holding the precious cargo close to her chest. Tom silently cleared a path through the tall grasses back toward their farmhouse. Behind them, with steady, deliberate steps, the mare quietly followed. Inside the cozy farmhouse kitchen, Sarah laid the twins gently onto the long wooden table, draped with soft towel. She worked methodically and calmly, drying their damp bodies, warming them meticulously, attending to every small scratch and bruise on their delicate skin. Tom stoked the fire, adding fresh logs until a comforting warmth filled the room, dancing softly over the sleeping faces of the 2 boys. Their breathing, though weak, was now steady and rhythmic, a reassuring sign of recovery. Solace stood quietly by the kitchen's open door, her presence comforting, almost protective. Sarah finally took a deep, cleansing breath, realizing she hadn't truly exhaled since the first sound of distress had shattered their peaceful morning. She lifted her eyes toward Tom, determination mingled with a quiet hope. "We don't know exactly what happened here," she said softly, her voice filled with an unshakable resolve. "But if fate or God brought these children to our doorstep, we have a duty to keep them safe." Tom met her gaze, nodding firmly, his eyes reflecting the same unwavering commitment. "They're ours to care for now," he agreed gently. "We'll find a way, together." Outside, under the shade of an ancient oak, Solace remained watchful, a silent sentinel to the miracle she had brought forth from the river's grass. Within the warmth of the Bennett home, a new chapter quietly began, born from loss, sustained by love, and blessed by an inexplicable guardian whose spirit had already intertwined irrevocably with their lives. After finally stabilizing the condition of the 2 young boys, Sarah found herself drawn back to the wicker basket that had carried them downriver. With careful fingers, she examined every inch of its lining, hoping for some clue, any identification, vaccination card or hospital record. She was growing increasingly concerned when she uncovered nothing. Just as her frustration mounted, Her fingertips brushed against something small, cool, and metallic, hidden deep within the damp fabric. She carefully drew it out and held it up to the faint kitchen light. A delicate silver emblem, intricately engraved with the image of a shield and a flaming harp. Sarah's heart quickened, though she was unsure of its significance. But when Tom entered the room, his face changed instantly upon seeing the object in her hand. That symbol, Tom's brow furrowed deeply. As recognition dawned, it's the Kane family emblem. I've seen it before. Their name is on the new wing at the City Museum. Slida nodded slowly, absorbing his words. The Kane family. They're pretty well known, aren't they? Wealthy and influential. Tom frowned slightly, nodding. Yes, Richard Kane practically owns half of Helena. Why would his emblem end up here with these kids? We need answers, Sarah said decisively. We'll never find them staying out here. Unable to identify the emblem further online without specific names, Sarah suggested they visit the local farmers market in Bitterroot Creek early Saturday morning, a gathering place for long-term residents who knew almost everything about local history. They agreed quickly, deciding they wouldn't mention anything about finding the children. Instead, they'd pretend to be antique collectors, casually asking about an old emblem they'd discovered. Before leaving, they asked a trusted neighbor to watch over their farm, ensuring Sarah's absence wouldn't raise questions. Tom wrapped the silver emblem carefully in silk, and both promised each other they'd keep conversations brief and vague, wary of drawing unwanted attention. Early Saturday morning, Sarah and Tom arrived in Bitterroot Creek. The town was bustling, booths lined with fresh produce, crafts, antiques, and the comforting notes of country music, softly drifting through the crisp air. Despite the lively atmosphere, Sarah felt a strange undercurrent of tension as she began asking vendors about the emblem. Most responses were polite but evasive. Older town folk hesitated, some shaking their heads or simply shrugging. One middle-aged woman visibly paled when she saw the silver emblem, quickly muttering a denial before busying herself elsewhere. Sarah glanced at Tom uneasily, sensing something deeply wrong beneath the surface. Just as discouragement began creeping in, Sarah spotted an elderly man seated in a quiet corner of the market, surrounded by stacks of old books and vintage instruments. His wrinkled hands trembled slightly as he adjusted a worn violin. Something compelled Sarah to approach him. "Excuse me, sir," Tom began gently, holding out the emblem. "Have you seen this symbol before?" The old man paused, studying the emblem carefully. A long silence followed, during which Sarah's heart thudded nervously. Finally, he looked up, meeting her eye. "I've seen that before," he began softly, voice thick with memory, "on the luggage of a young woman who used to come and play piano at the cafe every Sunday afternoon." "Was her name?" Sarah asked breathlessly. Lila Harper," he replied slowly, sadness flickering in his eye. "She was young, beautiful, talented, and pregnant. She moved into a secluded house deep in the woods about 5 years ago, then disappeared suddenly. No one ever found out why." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Was the house called Rosewood Hollow? The elderly man's eyes widened slightly in surprise before nodding gravely. "That's it, old Kane family mansion. Richard Kane's grandmother used to live there." He glanced nervously around the bustling market before leaning closer, voice lowering to nearly a whisper. "She was running from someone, most likely the father of her child. But nobody ever spoke up. The Kanes have money, lawyers, even the sheriff. Folks here know when to keep their mouths shut." The stark revelation sent a chill down Sarah's spine. She exchanged a solemn glance with Tom, the reality of their discovery sinking him deeply. The journey back home was quiet, both of them absorbed in heavy thought. Sarah gently traced the emblem's detailed engraving as Tom drove silently, his face tense and contemplative. Each piece of the puzzle was falling disturbingly into place. A pregnant young woman hiding in a Kane-owned house, her sudden disappearance, and now these abandoned children carrying the same family symbol. "You think the twins are hers, Lila's children?" Sarah finally asked, breaking the uneasy silence. Tom nodded solemnly, his eyes fixed firmly on the road ahead. "There's no doubt in my mind. It all lines up perfectly." Sarah gazed thoughtfully out of the window, watching as a light drizzle began to streak the glass. Tiny droplets formed delicate patterns before trickling slowly downwards, mirroring her thoughts. Why had the children been abandoned without identification? Why was there no trace of their mother or family documents? The silence felt heavy, pressing down on them both. As the gentle rain increased, pattering softly against the car's roof, Sarah felt as if it were an omen, a quiet warning of the difficulties that lay ahead. Their simple, quiet life had irrevocably shifted into uncertain territory. With every mile, it became clearer that they'd stepped into a story far deeper and darker than either of them had anticipated. "We need to be careful," Tom murmured softly, voicing Sarah's unspoken fear. "Whoever abandoned these children, someone from the Kane family, isn't going to want this discovered." Sarah clasped the emblem tightly, determination flooding her heart despite the anxiety churning inside her. "We found them for a reason, Tom. We're going to protect them, whatever it takes." He reached across and gently grasped her hand, squeezing reassuringly. "Whatever it takes," he echoed resolutely, driving forward into the growing storm. From the second night following the abandonment, Richard Kane found himself trapped within the same relentless nightmare. Each night brought the haunting repetition of two small, shivering figures standing alone in the forest. They were drenched, their frail arms reaching out into the mist, voices shaking as they cried desperately. "Father?" The setting never varied, always a gray, shadowed forest under a gentle rain, the droplets falling softly onto a carpet of brittle leaves. In the distance, amidst the sobbing of the children, echoed the faint, melancholy notes of a piano, played softly but persistently, resonating through the misty woodland. Richard would wake abruptly from these dreams, gasping for air, his pajamas soaked through with sweat, yet he confided in no one, not his fiancée nor his trusted assistant, Dominic. The torment was his alone, a secret he bore with increasingly heavy dread. As days stretched on, the nightmares bled into his waking life. Late at night, Richard found himself restless, checking his phone compulsively, convinced he'd heard the muffled cries of children drifting from his empty study. One evening, he entered his bathroom only to recoil in terror. Daytime provided Richard little respite, though outwardly he maintained his flawless facade. He attended meetings, signed contracts, appeared confidently in television interviews, every inch the composed, influential businessman the world expected him to be. Beneath that surface, however, cracks were forming. Migraines began invading his days, sharp pains throbbing behind his temples, accompanied by bouts of breathlessness and tightening in his chest whenever he glimpsed children playing innocently in the street. One afternoon, while walking hurriedly through a local park, Richard spotted a young boy hugging a wooden rocking horse. The sight made his knees buckle abruptly. Pretending to fix an untied shoelace, he knelt hastily, waiting until the vertigo subsided, terrified of his weakness becoming visible. Noticing the change, Dominic cautiously suggested, "Maybe it would help if you took some time off to relieve stress, sir." Richard immediately dismissed the idea, coldly asserting that everything was perfectly fine, though both knew it was a hollow denial. Driven by desperation, Richard finally scheduled an appointment with a renowned psychologist specializing in insomnia and mild paranoia. He justified the visit under the vague pretext of federal contract pressures. Initially, the session progressed normally, Richard skillfully deflecting deeper probes with practiced charm. But when the psychologist gently inquired, "Are there recurring images or sounds in your dreams, Mr. Kane?" Richard hesitated. His heart raced, his throat tightened. Finally, barely audible, he whispered, "2 children. They keep calling me father." Immediately horrified at his unintended admission, Richard stiffened, panic surging through his veins. Abruptly standing, he muttered something about an urgent business meeting, fleeing the consultation room before the psychologist could respond. Once safely locked inside his car, Richard sat motionless, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white, eyes fixed blankly on the dashboard. It took several long minutes before he could summon the strength to start the engine and drive away. Haunted by intensifying paranoia and the certainty that the past would claw its way back, Richard finally snapped. The nightmares were no longer just dreams. They were warnings. One storm-dark morning, he summoned Dominic to the penthouse. Unusual enough to worry the young assistant, Richard stood by the wall-to-ceiling windows, rain sheeting down the glass like prison bars. "Fine professionals," he said without preamble, voice frayed around the edges. "People who specialize in erasing complications." Dominic swallowed. "Investigators, sir, or call them whatever you like, so long as they leave no trace. No corporate cards, no invoices in my name, cash only," routed through an intermediary. "Understand?" The assistant hesitated, sensing the weight of the order. Richard's eyes flashed. "This isn't a request, I need to know, beyond doubt, that no one's alive to tell that story. Dominic nodded stiffly. Within hours, he connected with 2 off-the-grid trackers who had reputations for finding missing heirs and runaway teens. Their brief was simple. Calm the Bitterroot region. Ask discreet questions about any new family with twins or unexplained children appearing at rural clinics, birth centers, or isolated farms. They were instructed to use cover stories, survivors, wildlife researchers, roving medical volunteers, anything except the Kane name. Dominic delivered an unmarked envelope thick with untraceable banknotes and a list of local contacts to Greece. If results came quickly, a second envelope awaited. By week's end, the pair were already moving between riverside hamlets and remote homesteads, flashing charming smiles and subtle bribe. No one suspected the true force driving their questions, a father desperate not for reunion, but for silence. Their discreet inquiries included small-town medical facilities, rural clinics, midwives, and isolated farmhouses, all without revealing their true employer. The investigators moved quietly, speaking to locals under various pretexts, posing as reporters researching rural healthcare, census takers, or even distant relatives searching for family members. They meticulously documented any rumor, however minor, of recent births, adoptions, or foster children placements. Their careful inquiries slowly drew them closer to the Bennett farm, though without yet making the critical connection. Richard's internal turmoil deepened. During a particularly stormy night, unable to find rest, he retreated into his dimly lit study. On an impulse, he retrieved a hidden recording, Lila's piano performances, secretly kept from their brief, passionate past. As her delicate, haunting notes filled the room, Richard felt something deep inside him fracture. It was as if Lila's music tore directly through the protective shell he had meticulously built around his heart. "Stop," he pleaded softly, his voice raw and vulnerable in the solitude. Yet the music played on, ethereal and relentless. Covering his ears in a futile attempt to escape, Richard felt tears begin to sting his eyes. Tears of anger, fear, regret, and something else he refused to acknowledge openly. Grief. Outside, the rain intensified, drops hammering against the glass panes of his study windows, mirroring the storm raging within him, cracking, shifting, irrevocably changing the man he thought he was. The afternoon sky hung low, heavy with gray clouds, casting a dim pall over the Bennett farm. Sarah stood quietly by the clothesline, pinning up freshly washed sheets that fluttered gently in the cool breeze. Tom, occupied by fixing the chicken coop door, looked up sharply at the sound of gravel crunching beneath tires. A silver-gray pickup truck had pulled up outside their gate. It was an unfamiliar vehicle, pristine in its cleanliness, a stark contrast to the muddy farm roads of Bitterroot. 2 men emerged from the vehicle, their attire casual yet oddly immaculate. Shiny shoes gleamed conspicuously, untouched by the mud. Sarah instinctively stepped closer to Tom, who placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder as the taller man, around 40 with sharp eyes, approached the gate. He offered a polite but pointed greeting. "Good afternoon," he called out, voice smooth yet probing. "Sorry to bother you folks, but we're checking around. Heard some rumors about missing kids near the Bitterroot River area. Anyone around here mentioned seeing strange children or twins wandering about?" Tom hesitated briefly before responding carefully. "We're quite far from the river. Mostly deer and bears around here. Rarely see strangers or anyone lost." The second man remained silent, scanning their property carefully. His eyes lingered on the horse stable, then slowly moved up toward the second-floor window. Sarah's heart raced. He knew the boys were upstairs, safely asleep, yet felt utterly exposed under the stranger's penetrating gaze. After a few vague questions met by equally vague replies from Tom, the men withdrew abruptly, declining offers of water or hospitality, as if their visit was only meant to gather impressions rather than information. As their truck faded into the distance, Sarah's hand tightened around Tom. That evening, an air of restlessness settled over the farm. Solace, the white mare, typically tranquil, refused to enter her stable. Instead, she positioned herself stubbornly beneath the window of the boys' room, pawing the ground intermittently, emitting soft, anxious whinnies into the darkening woods. Tom stepped outside, flashlight slicing through the twilight gloom. Aside from faint tire tracks etched deeply near the gate, he found nothing unusual. Returning, he shook his head in puzzlement. "Here's nothing out there," he said softly. returning Sarah's worried gaze. She glanced toward the mare, eyes narrowed thoughtfully. He senses something, Sarah murmured. Animals know things we can't always see. Later that night, as darkness enveloped their small kitchen, Tom and Sarah sat together, illuminated only by a warm yellow glow from the single overhead lamp. The silence was heavy, until Tom broke it with cautious words. I know you've grown attached, Sarah, so have I, but we can't keep them hidden forever, he whispered, more to himself than to her. Sarah raised her head sharply, eyes fierce. You can't mean to give them back to the man who discarded them like trash. Tom shook his head quickly, sighing deeply. No, but you saw those men. They're searching, Sarah. And when they find us, the choice won't be ours anymore. She stared at the worn wood of the table for a long moment before speaking quietly, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. Here might be someone who knows more. She cared for Lila Harper during her pregnancy. If anyone knows what really happened, it's her. Tom hesitated visibly, the worry clear on his face. Sarah, if we talk to her, what if she contacts the Canes? Edna wouldn't do that, Sarah insisted gently, but firmly. She once told me, some things must rely on compassion rather than the law. We can trust her. They agreed with a cautious nod that they would visit Edna first thing in the morning, bringing both boys with them. Neither could bear the thought of leaving the twins alone at the farm after the day's unsettling events. After their decision, Sarah moved upstairs quietly, softly entering the boys' room. Michael and Gabriel lay side by side, breathing evenly, undisturbed by the turmoil surrounding their uncertain future. Gabriel, frailer than his brother, still occasionally clenched the blanket weakly in sleep. Sarah gently stroked his soft hair, whispering into the silence, Your mother left something behind, a clue or message. We'll find it, whatever it takes. Outside, Solace emitted a low, gentle whinny that echoed softly into the night. An affirmation, a quiet pledge of protection and solidarity. Sarah turned her gaze toward the window, meeting the watchful, knowing eyes of the mare, who had already done so much to safeguard these vulnerable lives. Thank you, Solace, she whispered softly, her voice barely audible even to herself. A faint, cool wind whispered through the trees beyond the window, carrying the distant murmur of the river, like a subtle reminder of how these boys had arrived, carried into their lives by fate and by love. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new revelations, but tonight, beneath the quiet watch of a faithful guardian, and within the safety of their modest farmhouse, Sarah allowed herself a fragile moment of hope. In that brief reprieve from worry, she felt Tom's steady hand on her shoulder as he entered quietly behind her. Together they watched the sleeping twins, hearts united in silent determination. We're doing the right thing, aren't we? Tom asked softly, voice tinged with uncertainty. Yuzuri turned, her eyes filled with quiet strength. The right thing isn't always clear, but protecting these children, that's something we'll never question. Tom smiled faintly, drawing her close. They stood silently in the doorway, wrapped in shared resolve and quiet bravery, knowing they had embarked on a journey filled with uncertainty, but unwilling to abandon the path they'd chosen, guided only by compassion and the deep instinctual love that had quickly bonded them to these innocent lives, now entrusted to their care. Early the next morning, under a pale sky streaked with dawn's faint blush, Sarah and Tom bundled the two sleeping children into the back of their old station wagon. Their destination was Edna May's cabin, tucked quietly away deep within the thick pine forests west of town. As they navigated the winding dirt paths, dense trees pressed close, casting shifting patterns of shadow and light across the road. At last the quaint cabin appeared, nestled comfortably amidst ivy-covered pines. Its roof slanted gracefully, giving the impression it had grown naturally from the woods around it. Sarah stepped onto the porch and raised her hand to knock, but before she could, the door swung open slowly. Come in, a gentle yet gravelly voice beckoned. I've been expecting you both for quite some time. Edna stood there, her small frame wrapped warmly in a knitted shawl, her silver hair neatly pinned up, eyes sharp but kind. Sarah's gaze instantly caught a photograph hanging over the fireplace mantel. Leela, her hair cascading gently around her shoulders, wearing a white dress, one hand softly cradling a swollen belly, eyes filled with quiet hope. Please sit, Edna said softly, gesturing towards the worn but comfortable sofa near the fireplace. Sarah carefully placed Gabriel and Michael down, still wrapped snugly in blankets, sleeping peacefully. Edna's eyes lingered on their small, serene faces, deep lines forming around her eyes as a wave of sorrow and recognition passed over her. Yes, it's them, the eyes, those delicate lips. They are Leela's blood, no doubt about it, she whispered. Sarah took a seat, her heart tightening painfully in her chest. Edna settled into her rocking chair, pausing briefly before beginning her story, eyes distant with memories. 5 years ago, Leela Harper came to me, a fragile young woman, just beginning to She was brave but terrified, desperate to escape something she wouldn't immediately reveal. She found refuge at Rosewood Hollow, the abandoned Kane family estate, hidden enough to shield her from prying eyes. Slyta's breath quickened slightly at the mention of Rosewood Hollow. Edna continued softly, her voice steady. He didn't speak the father's name until near the end, but one night, when the pains came early, she finally whispered through tears, "If they find out, they'll take my baby." Edna paused, and Sarah instinctively reached for Tom's hand, gripping it tightly, understanding all too well Leela's desperate choice to disappear. On the night of the birth, Edna recounted, eyes brimming with tears, "I was away, gathering herbs, unaware the storm had risen so fierce. When I returned, Leela lay nearly unconscious on the cabin floor. Gabriel was born first, silent and pale. In agony, she summoned every bit of strength left to deliver Mike." Edna took a shuddering breath before continuing. "I thought we'd lost them, but then, somehow Leela's hand found the keys of the piano. Through the pains, she played the first notes of a lullaby she had written. Her voice, breaking with grief yet filled with determination, began to sing, and the babies responded. They cried out, breathing life for the first time." Edna's voice shook, overcome by the vividness of the memory. But the bleeding, it wouldn't stop. Leela knew she was fading. Her last words were instructions, whispered silently. Edna rose and opened a small wooden drawer, carefully lifting out a cloth bundle, tied securely with twine. She placed it gently on Sarah's lap, nodding solemnly, as Sarah unwrapped its precious contents. A yellowed sheet of music titled, "Lullaby for Two," smudged gently by tears or sweat. A red leather-bound diary filled meticulously with Leela's delicate handwriting, chronicling her pregnancy, love for Richard, and unspoken anguish. A legally validated handwritten will, declaring the twins as her legitimate heirs, born at Rosewood Hollow. And finally, papers detailing the surprising transfer of ownership of Rosewood Hollow, from Richard's grandmother directly to Leela. Leela didn't just hide away to give birth, Edna murmured quietly. She secured their future the only way she knew how, ensuring their claim to a home heritage, and her undying love, through music. Sarah's vision blurred with tears, as she read Leela's final diary entry aloud, her voice barely a whisper. "If you ever hear this melody, my loves, you'll know that I have loved you beyond life itself." Tom gently took the property documents from Sarah's trembling fingers, his voice steady but odd. "They aren't nameless orphans. They have a mother, a home, and music as proof of her love." Sarah turned sharply to Edna, urgency burning in her eyes. "Who else knows about this?" Edna sighed softly, placing a comforting hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Only one other, Rebecca Kane, Richard's sister. She loved Leela deeply, and mourned her disappearance. She can help." Resolute now, Sarah rose with a newfound strength in her voice. "Then it's time to bring the boys home, to their rightful place." Edna stood as well, nodding in agreement, eyes bright with determination. "Yes, and it's time to let their mother's music live again." As evening shadows lengthened, Sarah and Tom prepared to depart Edna's quiet sanctuary. They carried Gabriel and Michael carefully to their car, now armed with truth, music, and unshakable resolve. Just as they stepped outside, a gentle breeze whispered softly through the trees, carrying the faint, poignant notes of a distant piano melody. Sarah paused, turning back briefly to meet Edna's knowing gaze. "Thank you," she breathed softly. Edna nodded gently, her voice tender. "Take care of them. Let her song guide you all home." Sarah said nothing further, the melody drifting through the evening air, offering quiet assurance that Leela's presence lingered still, watching over them, eternally protected. As their vehicle moved slowly away, deeper into the gathering twilight, Sarah held tightly onto the bundle Edna had entrusted to them, knowing that their path now led to truths yet untold, justice yet unclaimed, and a love so powerful it transcended time itself. The drive to Missoula wound along mountain ridges dusted with the first hint of winter. Pines rolled past in blur after blur, but Sarah could not let her gaze stray from the rearview mirror, where Michael and Gabriel dozed together beneath a quilt. Edna sat beside her in the passenger seat, hands folded over a worn leather portfolio, while Tom followed behind with solace in the horse trailer, keeping a respectful distance. "Rebecca Kane," Edna said for perhaps the 10th time, as if to steady them all. She loved Leela like a sister. If any Kane still carries a real heart, it's her. Rebecca, they knew, now taught music history at the University of Montana, a life far removed from boardrooms and headlines. Still, Sarah had insisted on bringing tangible proof: Leela's diary pages and the fragile tape containing her voice, to place directly into Rebecca's hands. A letter would never be enough. They arrived just before dusk. The university's recital hall loomed tall and modern, its glass facade catching the orange smear of sunset. Inside, students and faculty drifted from rows of velvet seats after an afternoon masterclass. At the edge of the stage, a compact woman with ash-brown hair pulled into a low knot conferred quietly with a student string quartet. Her posture was composed, her student plain but elegant. "That's her," Edna whispered. Heart pounding, Sarah stepped forward, Gabriel in her arms. Tom carried Michael, still half sleepy. Rebecca turned, polite curiosity lifting one brow at the sight of the strange party. "Professor Kane," Edna greeted softly, recognition flickered. "Mrs. May, it's been years, is everything all right?" Edna introduced Sarah and Tom, then asked for a private word. Rebecca guided them to a small green room lined with practice pianos. Coffee cups and sheet music littered a low table. The door clicked shut, and the professor folded her arms gently, waiting. "Rebecca," Edna began, "this concerns Lila." The name drew a visible jolt. "I'm sorry," Rebecca said, voice stiffening. "I cared about her, but why come to me now? Because I'm Richard's sister?" Sarah steadied her breathing. "Because Lila left children behind and the truth can't stay hidden." Rebecca's expression hardened into wary concern. "What truth?" Edna produced a small digital recorder, pressed play. Lila's weakened voice filled the cramped room. "If I don't survive the birth, keep my music safe and guard my sons." At the sound, Rebecca's grip on her coffee mug tightened until the porcelain creaked, her composure faltering. Sarah lowered the blanket shielding Gabriel. The boy stirred, blinking at the unfamiliar space. Light from a desk lamp caught his irises, clear slate blue flecked with gold at the edges. Lila's unmistakable eyes, but with a shadow that hinted at Richard. Rebecca inhaled sharply. Those eyes, that mouth. She backed into a chair and sat abruptly, one hand pressed to trembling lips. "Richard told me they'd been placed with a foster agency. He said the paperwork was confidential." Anger cracked through her confusion. "He lied to me, lied about everything." Edna reached across, clasping Rebecca's shaking fingers. "He lied to Lila too." Tears brimmed, but did not fall. Rebecca turned her gaze to Michael, resting in Tom's arms. "They deserve better than secrets." Rebecca's voice lowered as she recounted an old age. Years earlier, at a friend's wedding reception, she glimpsed Lila standing at the edge of the garden, watching from afar. Before Rebecca could cross the lawn, Lila had vanished into the night. When she later asked her brother, Richard dismissed it as a trick of greed. "You only saw her because you miss her." After that, he erased Lila's name from every conversation. "I believed him," she confessed, wiping her eyes. "Perhaps because I didn't want to think my own brother capable of something cruel." Her gaze fell upon Michael's small fist, now tugging idly at her sleeve while still half asleep. No child should live under the shadow of that lie. Edna laid the property deed on the table. "Rosewood Hollow stands in these boys' names." Rebecca studied the seal, surprise turning to determination. "Then we take them home, not just to secure inheritance, but to keep them safe, publicly." Sarah bit her lip. "Richard won't stay idle," Rebecca straightened, the reserved professor now replaced by a guardian. "I used to be afraid of him. Not anymore. What he tried to destroy, I will restore." She outlined swift steps, immediate relocation. That night, they would drive to Rosewood Hollow with the twins, and every original document, too. Neutral counts. Rebecca would hire an independent estate attorney. not on the Kane payroll. To authenticate Lila's will and secure injunctions, Sarah and Tom would remain inside the estate, with the boys, Solace and a trusted neighbor on call. While Rebecca handled legal fronts in town, Rebecca placed a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. You saved them when everyone else turned away. Now it's my turn. Plans set, they exited through a side door of the recital hall. Across the quad, a man in dark glasses lingered near a statue, phone lifted as if studying architecture. The lens, however, tracked their group. A silent snap of a camera shutter echoed only in Sarah's imagination. Yet she felt its chill. Richard's reach has begun, she thought. In the car, Rebecca caught the concern on Sarah's face and followed her gaze to the retreating figure. She exhaled. He's watching. Good. Let him know the story is no longer his to author. As they headed back toward the mountains, clouds parted above snow-capped peaks. Rebecca watched light spill across the ridges, whispering, Lila, if you can hear me, I promise your children will come home to music and truth. Inside the back seat, Gabriel's eyes fluttered open once more. For a fleeting second, he seemed to listen to a melody only he could hear, then drifted back to sleep, cradled in a future finally turning toward morning. Night had barely settled on the highway outside Missoula when Rebecca eased the battered pickup down an unlit service ramp and onto a county back road. She, Sarah, Tom, Edna, the twins and Solace tethered in a small borrowed horse trailer, were a strange convoy, but each mile swallowed by the tires felt like one breath closer to sanctuary. Tom drove. Rebecca sat beside him, maps scattered across her lap, hands tight on the dash each time headlights flared in the rearview mirror. Behind them, Edna dozed fitfully in the jump seat, arms cradling Michael, while Sarah tucked a blanket around Gabriel and kept watch through the dusty rear window. They had switched vehicles at the edge of town, leaving Rebecca's university sedan cold and empty in a faculty lot. This borrowed truck had no GPS, no Bluetooth, no data trail, an antique in the best sense. But Richard Kane's net was vast. At a lonely gas station perched where timber country began, Tom braked for fuel. Sarah slid out to stretch. That was when she spotted the black SUV, trim, tinted, engine running 3 pumps away. Its driver never left the seat, face hidden beneath a ball cap. Sarah's stomach chilled. She tapped Tom's elbow. That's no coincidence. Tom slammed the cap back onto the tank. Everyone in. Now he fired the ignition, cut cross lanes, and barreled down a logging service track that only locals used. A rutted ribbon that twisted deeper into Bitterroot National Forest. Gravel kicked skyward, and the SUV's distant headlights slid from the station lot, giving chase. Minutes later, moonlight vanished beneath thickening clouds. Rain began in a hush, then steadied, pine silhouettes blurred by the windshield. The pickup's engine rumbled but held. North Spur or Deer Path? Tom asked Rebecca. Deer Path? She decided. Shortcut to the hollow. He cut left, jolting through brush. Branches slapped the chassis. Solace banged her flank against the trailer gate, whinnying uneasily. The storm crept across the treetops, bringing streaks of lightning that lit the forest in jagged flashes. Solace stomped, snorting hard enough to shake the trailer. Edna, now fully awake, murmured, She knows trouble is near, the way wild things know. The pickup lumbered up a muddy incline and sputtered to a stop. A landslip had swallowed the track. They were less than 2 miles from Rosewood Hollow, but the road was gone. Footpath, Rebecca said, wiping rain from her lashes. They unloaded swiftly. Gabriel nestled against Sarah's chest, Michael against Tom's. Edna hefted the document satchel beneath her raincoat. Rebecca led with a lantern. Solace stepped free of the trailer and swung her head, ears twitching at the wind. They had advanced barely 50 paces into the dark when the bark of a rifle cracked through the drizzle. Stop right there, a voice commanded. 2 men emerged from a stand of furs, camouflage jackets, combat boots, assault rifles leveled. Richard's hounds. The lantern dropped. Mud quenched its flame. In an instant, the forest became a chaotic maze of shadow. Run, Rebecca hissed. Sarah clutched Gabriel and sprinted downslope. Tom veered opposite with Michael. Edna ducked behind a granite outcrop, clutching the satchel to her chest. One gunman, nervous at the scattering silhouettes, tracked Sarah's fleeing form. More precisely, the small head on her shoulder. The muzzle flashed. Rebecca lunged forward. Scream lost to thunder. Their children. The bullet tore through the wet air toward mother and son, and Solace exploded from the undergrowth, a white comet against the black pines, intercepting in a blur of muscle and devotion. The round struck her broad chest with a sickening thud. She wheeled once, legs folded, collapsed into ferns. Sarah fell, shielding Gabriel with her body. The boy wailed. Unhurt, the gunman staggered, horror dawning in his eyes. Tom roared, swinging a broken limb like a club. The second shooter fired upward in panic, then bolted as Tom closed distance. The first dropped his rifle and followed, the forest swallowing their retreat. Rain hammered leaves, steam curled from Solace's wound. By the time Sarah crawled to her, the horses' breaths were shallow clouds. They gathered in a narrow ravine, sheltered from the worst of the storm. Sarah's sobs shook her as she cradled Solace's head in her lap. Gabriel reached out, patting the mare's wet muzzle, tears silently tracking his cheeks. Edna knelt, voice breaking. She found them once, and she found a way to save them again. Tom's hand trembled on Sarah's shoulder. She knew what mattered most, he whispered. Michael, still clinging to Tom's coat, murmured, "Where did she go?" Rebecca removed a braided leather necklace from her pocket, Solace's neckband, and pressed it into Gabriel's tiny palm. "She'll be with you every time your heart beats," she told him gently. The boy closed his fist around the keepsake. Thunder rolled like distant drums. Solace exhaled once more, a breath that seemed to carry the forest's scent, then stilled. Rainwater mixed with Sarah's tears, trailing down the mare's white coat like liquid starlight. Minutes stretched, grief rooting them in place, but the night was far from safe. Rebecca straightened first. Her sacrifice can't be wasted. We move. Tom wiped rain from his eyes, hoisting Michael onto his hip. We go on foot, quiet. No lanterns. They left the clearing, hearts heavier than their packs, but steps determined. Solace's form faded behind them, moonlight briefly piercing clouds to crown her with a silver glow. The path to Rosewood Hollow was an old service trail once used by lumber carts, now little more than a ribbon of moss and shattered stone. Edna directed them by memory as branches scraped their coats, and slick roots threatened every stride. Sarah whispered to the sleeping Gabriel, feeling the braid warm in his hand. "She's still guiding us," she promised him. Above, wind shifted, carrying no motor growl. Richard's hunters had fled the gunfire for now, but dawn would bring new danger. They pressed on, rain tapered to mist by the time the ancient gate of Rosewood Hollow loomed. Twin pillars of hewn granite entangled by vines, an archway older than any living soul in Bitterroot. Rebecca paused, turned back toward the ravine. In her mind, she saw Solace racing, white mane a banner of courage. "I'll speak your name," she vowed into the hush. "Every time the piano sings, the world will remember." A sudden gust rattled the high pine. A lone white petal, curious, in a forest absent of blossoms, drifted from the dark and landed on her shoulder. Sarah stepped beside her, voice hoarse. She brought them home. Rebecca, even without breath, she finished the journey. They stepped beneath the archway, carrying children, documents, and the memory of a horse who taught them what devotion truly meant. At their backs, the wind hushed like turning pages, ushering them into the next act of a story too vast for silence. Dawn hovered like a pale ghost when the exhausted party finally reached the moss-laden gate of Rosewood Hollow. Beneath curling vines and lichen, the twin pillars of stone seemed to bow, in grudging welcome, as Rebecca slid from the pickup and pried open the rust-bound hinges. Past the gate, the manor emerged, slate roof striated with dark moss, shuttered windows clouded by years of dust, yet upright and strangely dignified, as though the house itself had waited in vigilant stillness for this homecoming. Keys clinked in Rebecca's trembling hand, an antique brass ring Edna had safeguarded since Lila's death. At the threshold she paused, breathed once, then turned the key. The door's creak sighed through the foyer like a memory. Inside, silence ruled. Dust motes drifted in the gray light. A white-shrouded piano loomed in the music room. The lavender sachets, long faded, faintly perfumed the air. Time had stopped here the day Lila left. Upstairs, Sarah nudged open the bedroom door. Lila had once called her sanctuary. Pale curtains hung limp, color drained by seasons of sun. A faint outline of fingers smudged the white paint beside the knob, a whisper of Lila's touch. Against one wall sat a vanity layered in fine dust. Resting on its surface were a chestnut-bound journal and a thick sheaf of sheet music, pressed between two heavy volumes of Chopin. Rebecca's voice wavered as she peeled back the top. The White Mare's Waltz, notes spilled across the staves, bold, unfinished. Her fingertip traced a penciled instruction. To be completed when my children learn to dance. Sarah opened the journal. Amid pregnancy entries and sketches of tiny hands lay a shaky paragraph, ink blotted, lines crooked. If you ever hear me play, know that I am near. Music does not die. It simply slips into a tongue the heart alone can comprehend. In Sarah's arms, Gabriel stirred, eyes half open, lips curling into a faint, dreamy smile, as if he'd caught a distant melody. Tom searched methodically, finally kneeling beside the bed frame where a warped plank wobbled. Behind it lay a cedar box latched with a simple clasp. Inside, 2 birth certificates. The line for father left blank. Mother Lila Harper, place of birth, Rosewood Hollow. A deed of transfer naming direct descendants of Lila Harper, sole owners of the estate. A sealed letter addressed to the one who uncovers truth. I need no favor from Richard Kane. I need my sons to know they were adored from the first spark of life, and that this house keeps that memory breathing. Rebecca exhaled a shaky breath. No room left for doubt. The boys belong here, and so does justice. Rain had stopped. Tom coaxed a fire in the cavernous hearth, flames reflecting in Gabriel's wide eyes. Sarah tucked the twins into Lila's old 4-poster bed, humming the beginning of Lullaby for Two. Exhaustion melted into the mattress with them. Tom stayed downstairs on watch. Edna, tea mug cradled in arthritic hands, whispered prayers by the drawn curtains. Rebecca drifted to the music room where moonlight pooled over the covered piano. She pulled away the linen, lifted the fallboard. Keys yellowed with age glimmered faintly. Without thinking, she pressed a single note, soft as snowfall. Midnight listened. A second note answered, though Rebecca's hands were motionless. Air trembled with a third, then a fourth, forming the interval that opened Lila's lullaby. Not startled, Rebecca set her fingers down and completed the phrase. The house breathed with her, beams creaking in approval. When she ceased, a sigh of wind brushed through the cracked window and plucked 3 final tones. A child's reply from the dark. Sun found them at last, spilling through broken shutters. Gold flecks danced across a framed photograph atop the piano. Lila laughing in midsummer, eyes bright with secrets. Michael awoke first, crawling across the quilt to peer out the window at dew-pearled roses. Gabriel followed, his cheeks newly flushed with strength. Hearing footsteps, Rebecca entered. The boys beamed and chorused. Auntie B. Michael garbled the tea, but the intent rang clear. Kitchen smells drifted up the hall. Edna steeping mint tea in a porcelain pot, older than any of them. She appeared in the doorway, steam haloing her silver hair. I dreamt of Lila, she murmured. She was outside that window, smiling, as though she'd been waiting for sunrise. Sarah laid a hand atop the waltz manuscript. She led us here. Now it's time the world learns the rest. Rebecca nodded, eyes steady on the keys. We'll speak through music first, then through the law. Outside, morning bird song threaded through the pine. For the first time since the river, the twins laughed together without fear. And somewhere in the rippling quiet of the corridor, a faint chord lingered, as if the house itself were tuning for the symphony still to come. Rosewood Hollow awoke to the scent of coffee and the shy crackle of eggs in a cast-iron skillet. Outside, fog still clung to the ravine, reluctant to release the night. Inside, Sarah hummed a lullaby, Lila's lullaby, incomplete yet hopeful, while Rebecca counted teacups on the sideboard, mind already drafting affidavits. Edna poured batter into a griddle, muttering, "A proper breakfast for a siege." Madame stoked the stove until its iron belly glowed. The twins sat atop the long table, Gabriel tracing flour swirls with a fingertip, Michael feeding crumbs to the light that angled through a cracked pane. The first sound of engines came thin and distant, then closer, gravel protesting beneath heavy tires. Everyone froze. Tom set the poker down. Rebecca crossed to the window. 3 vehicles climbed the dirt drive, a glossy black SUV, a county cruiser, whose red-blue bar flickered lazily, and a silver sedan bearing the insignia of a downtown law firm. They parked in a neat row, as though orchestrated for a photograph. Richard Kane emerged first, dark suit immaculate, tie blade straight. Only the faint tremor of his clenched jaw hinted at the maelstrom beneath. Behind him stepped a barrel-chested attorney and two uniformed deputies. A third figure, the local sheriff, Marlon Hayes, swung from the cruiser, hat pulled low, gaze unreadable. Richard strode to the porch, voice carrying like frost. "I'm here to retrieve my nephews and to reclaim this property from unlawful occupation." Tom opened the screen door, blocking the threshold. "You abandoned them. They're not parcels to return on a whim." The attorney, McVeigh, inserted himself smoothly. "Mr. Bennett, harboring minors without legal guardianship constitutes kidnapping. Sheriff Hayes will enforce a temporary custody order until corporate guardians can be appointed." Hayes lifted a placid hand. "I'll listen to every side before I do any enforcing." He spoke with the calm Steele that had made him the only lawman in 3 counties. No one ever bought. Rebecca stepped onto the porch, a violet ribbon binding the thick dossier against her chest. Her voice, though soft, cut through the morning chill. "There is nothing temporary about the truth. Mr. McVeigh," she offered the file, diagrams, notarized documents, medical notes, and a sworn will naming me guardian, and these children primary heir. Everything duly registered, a fact your firm neglected to verify. She listed the exhibits: witnessed will of Lila Harper, sealed by Reverend Connolly, birth certificates issued here at Rosewood Hollow, a digital recording of Lila hours before labor, pleading protection for her twins, a letter indicting Richard's deliberate denial of obstetric care. Hayes skimmed the pages, his tanned complexion paled, jaw muscle twitching. Old friendship with Lila surfaced in his eyes like a storm tide. Rebecca's voice lowered but carried farther. "This isn't neglect. It's deprivation of maternal medical aid, resulting in wrongful death. Add abandonment and conspiracy to conceal minors. Counts multiply quickly." Richard's attorney opened his mouth, but the sheriff silenced him. "You'll speak when I finish my read." An invisible cord tightened between porch and vehicle. In that hush, a single piano note drifted from the parlor. Clear, bell pure, heads turned. No one was inside the music room. Another note, then a phrase. Gentle, rocking lullaby for 2. The melody wove through doorways, brushing every ear, tugging every memory. Richard's face blanched. Without spoken leave, he stepped across the threshold, drawn as if gravity itself had changed polarity. Inside, sunlight had found the piano's ivory keys. No hands moved, yet the song unfolded, soft and certain. He halted before the instrument. His fingertips hovered, trembling, then rested flat upon the lid. Breath hitched, vision blurred, dipped. Love buried beneath ambition. Avarice. Terror surged up, unbidden and unstoppable. Memory crashed over him. New York City. The Gala Hall. 2 decades ago. Stage lights dimmed. Lila, slender in a black gown, seated herself. Chords rose, so luminous the walls faded, leaving only her in resonance. Backstage, Richard stood transfixed. Afterward, he found her in a corridor smelling of rosin and damp velvet. She smiled, asking, "What did you hear?" He, tongue-tied, had whispered the only honest word he owned: sincerity. The lullaby's final measure dissolved into silence. Richard's tears slipped freely, first since childhood. Guilt unspooled inside him like a too-tight watch spring-breaking. He turned to the doorway. Everyone watched. Rebecca, Sarah, Tom, the boys sheltered behind skirts. Hayes's hand rested near his holster, not in threat, but readiness. Rebecca spoke quietly. "They don't need you, but you need to choose: continue the lie or end it." Richard's gaze dropped to Gabriel, who peeked from Sarah's hip. In that child's eyes he saw Lila's courage, and his own unearned reflection. "I thought," Richard rasped, "if I silenced the music, I could silence her." He swallowed. "But music is how she survives." McVeigh cleared his throat. About to protest, Richard lifted a tired hand. "Withdraw every motion." "Stephen." The attorney stared. "Sir, do it." Something in that brittle tone made even McVeigh obey. Hayes exhaled, relief and fury warring. "Mr. Kane, you'll stay in town. We'll review charges once the DA sees this. Richard nodded. Not defeat, perhaps acceptance. He stepped outside where morning sun finally broke the fog. Hayes turned to Sarah. Ma'am, the department stands behind you. No one is taking these kids tonight. Rebecca's shoulders sagged. She looked at Lila's framed photo on the wall. The eyes that once shone with promise. Your music protected them, she whispered. Gabriel clapped, small palms echoing like delicate hoofbeats. In his mind, maybe in all their minds, Solace trotted across a moonlit meadow, stamping once in benediction. Tom murmured. Law and dollars argued here, but the tune ended the fight. Outside, blue sky widened over the estate, as if space itself had opened for the next movement of a symphony that began with a white horse at a river's edge, and now waited for justice to play its bold crescendo. The courthouse in Missoula rises like a fortress of sandstone and glass above the Clark Fork River, its columns damp with spring drizzle on the morning. Richard Kane is led through its revolving door. He offers no struggle, wrists already cuffed in front of his impeccable suit, head bowed only enough to avoid the camera flashes that fizz like angry hornets. Sheriff Hayes walks beside him, hand resting near the holster, but unnecessary. Richard moves as though the weight on his shoulders has finally found equal weight in steel. The day after the confrontation at Rosewood Hollow, local deputies and 2 state investigators arrived at the Kane estate with a warrant. Richard greeted them in the marble foyer, signed a single sheet acknowledging his rights, and handed over his phone without prompt. No prepared statement, no demand for counsel. He merely said, "Please ensure the Steinway is tuned weekly while I am away." By noon, the same noon stained by rain now sliding across courthouse window panes, 3 counts have been logged. Abandonment of minors, willful obstruction of medical care resulting in death and destruction of evidence. A former executive assistant arrives unannounced with a leather journal, date-stamped entries detailing Richard's instructions to sanitize Lila's clinic records and bribe an EMT. The journal's pages are notarized and delivered to the clerk. Richard studies them only once, murmuring to the bailiff, "I never imagined a melody could cut deeper than a blade." The formal hearing convenes 3 weeks later in the wide walnut chamber on the building's 3rd floor. Rebecca occupies the petitioner's table, composed in a navy suit, lavender ribbon marking the thick file before her. Sarah and Tom sit directly behind, the twins between them, Gabriel drowsy against Sarah's shoulder, Michael tracing grooves in the oak rail. Judge Albright listens to the stipulations first. The state concedes Lila Harper's notarized will. Opposing counsel, no longer McVeigh, but a junior litigator left holding the brief, offers a mild objection about chain of custody, and then withdraws it under the judge's raised brow. One by one, confirmations follow like steady drumbeats. Rebecca is affirmed guardian ad litem per Lila's express directive. Sarah and Tom's emergency foster status converts to full adoptive custody based on 6 months uninterrupted care. The boys are declared legitimate heirs of Lila Harper and, by a grandmother's obscure codicil, inheritors of any Kane property tied to Rosewood Hollow. When the decree is read aloud, Gabriel shifts in his sleep, a faint smile curving his lips, as though some hidden part of him registers the settling of centuries-old dust. Rebecca's composure fractures at the final gavel. She allows tears to spill, wiping them unashamed. "We lost Lila," she whispers to Sarah, "but at least we kept our promise." Tom leans in, voice husky. "From the first second you placed them in our arms, they were ours. Now the law finally agreed." Shudders flutter when Rebecca exits carrying Michael on her hip, an image that echoes an old publicity still of Lila outside Carnegie Hall. Uncanny in pose and lighting, Richard is absent. A psychiatrist has recommended continuous observation after he spent 2 nights pacing his cell, reciting Chopin opus numbers under his breath. The judge signs the transfer without objection. The prosecutor could, with ease, push for felony homicide and decades in state prison. Instead, during Chambers' conference, Rebecca requests the matter be remanded to family court with a rehabilitation clause. Sarah and Tom agree. Their reasons are written in the margin of Rebecca's legal pad. 1. Shield the boys from prolonged testimony. 2. Spare the Kane name for the sake of scholarships and charities Lila once admired. Judge Albright accepts. Richard is committed to Pinecrest Behavioral Facility for 15 years, barred from any contact with the children or their estate. The order is clear. Should he seek early release, he must show sustained participation in therapy and a public acknowledgement of wrongdoing. That afternoon, before transport, Richard drafts 7 words on hotel stationery and sends it through his lawyer to Rebecca. If you ever play that song again, no threat follows, no plea, only the thin ellipsis of a man uncertain whether the music will heal or haunt. Late light washes the valley when the family returns to Rosewood Hollow. Pine scent mingles with sawdust from Tom's ongoing repair. New curtains flutter like pale sails. In the music room, Rebecca lifts the fallboard, inviting the twins onto the bench. She begins Lullaby for Two. At the second bar, Gabriel's small hand lands confidently on the higher octave, echoing her melody. Michael giggles, clapping in perfect 3/4 time, though he's never been taught. When Rebecca reaches the final cadence, both boys smack the keys in joyous applause. The chord a bright if dissonant, C major 7th that somehow feels exactly right. Sarah wipes her eye. Perhaps music really is what keeps Lila here with us. From the doorway, Edna adds, not only her spirit, her legacy, and legacies grow best in sunlight. Rebecca closes the lid gently. Outside, the last gold of evening catches the old stone gate, lighting it as though each grain remembers a white mare's farewell. Somewhere in the hush beyond the try-line, a faint clop echoes, a memory more than a sound, but the twins look up and grin, certain all the same. The verdict was hardly a week old when the first work crews arrived at Rosewood Hollow. Their trucks rattled up the winding drive at dawn, headlights sweeping over ivy-choked statues and cracked flagstone. But by sunset, the manor's silence had been broken by the chirr of drills and the warm chatter of volunteers. Sarah watched from the veranda, Gabriel perched on her hip, Michael clinging to her hand, both boys dazzled by the bustle. It felt, she thought, like a great house inhaling for the first time in years. The decision to remain was unanimous. Rosewood Hollow was no longer a hiding place. It was a beginning. Within a month, Rebecca filed the charter for the Lila Harper Foundation, pledging its mission in 3 clear lines: to fund single mothers pursuing the arts, to shelter gifted children, abandoned by circumstance, to offer music-based therapy for any child carrying invisible wounds. Soon the ground floor ballroom had been cleared of cobwebs and sheet-draped furniture, its high ceiling reglazed until daylight pooled across the parquet like liquid gold. The upright Steinway, Lila's own, claimed center stage, flanked by mismatched pews donated from a decommissioned chapel. Every Saturday, local teens helped repaint the walls a calm eggshell blue, laughing when flecks of color freckled their cheeks. Sarah took charge of medical intake, coaxing wary foster kids to trust stethoscopes and gentle bandages. Tom transformed the South Meadow into a kitchen garden, coaxing heirloom tomatoes from stubborn clay while rebuilding the old carriage house into a modest stable. There he welcomed a dapple gray colt whom Michael promptly christened Hope, because, he explained solemnly, that's what comes after solace. Rebecca oversaw it all, yet found time to carve a line of italic script into the arched oak gate, where silence becomes song. Pass beneath, and you felt, somehow, that even sorrow could modulate into melody. Once the dust of renovation settled, Sarah kept her promise to the cardiologists in Missoula. Gabriel, now 5, slight but bright-eyed, underwent fresh scan. The news was measured. His congenital defect had stabilized, yet surgery remained imperative before his 6th birthday. The rare blood type posed the old threat. Rebecca, wielding the Kane surname for the first time as shield instead of sword, contacted transplant coordinators nationwide. Weeks dragged by until one brittle morning, a call crackled through. A compatible donor heart, lost in an accident outside Denver, was being airlifted north. Paperwork flew. A pediatric OR was prepped before twilight. 5 silent hours passed in the hospital's pale waiting lounge. Tom paced. Edna prayed. Sarah never unclenched the photocopy of Lullaby for Two. She kept folded in her pocket, fingertips tracing semicircles over the faded treble clef. At last a surgeon emerged, eyes fatigued yet bright. He's small but stubborn, she announced. The graft took beautifully. Gabriel woke under the hush of recovery lights. Sarah's face, drawn, sleepless, radiant, hovered above him. He fought the ventilator tube, whispered around it with surprising clarity. "Mom." The single word struck deeper than any scalpel. Sarah's knees buckled. She sobbed into the sterile blankets, gratitude pounding like wings beneath her ribs. The anesthesiologist smiled from the doorway. "Little champion," she murmured. "And you, ma'am, won the day you chose the river over fear." Seasons turned. Roses reclaimed the crumbling east trellis, and laughter ricocheted through corridors once hushed. Michael proved fearless, forever mapping the estate with scavenger hunt diagrams, recruiting visiting kids into elaborate make-believe expeditions. Gabriel remained quieter, yet his ears seemed tuned to frequencies others missed. The snap of a single pine needle, the far-off drone of bees, the precise pitch of rain on slate. One overcast afternoon, Rebecca idly played a Chopin prelude. Mid-phrase, a small hand slid beside hers. Gabriel echoed the melody an octave higher, perfect to the rubato. She halted, stunned. "Where did you learn that?" Gabriel shrugged. Unbothered, Michael supplied. "He hears it once. It sticks." Tom, leaning in the doorway, crossed himself, half jesting. "Blood memory," he whispered, half awed, half amused. The Foundation's inaugural year ended with a modest recital. Community volunteers strung fairy lights between cypress trunks. Folding chairs dotted the lawn. Children from every outreach program performed. Shy violinists, bold drummers, a choir of voices newly unafraid. For the finale, Rebecca invited Michael and Gabriel to the freshly polished Steinway. Michael, solemn as a stage manager, turned pages and tapped steady meter on the lid. Gabriel, shoes dangling above the pedals, breathed once and began Lullaby for Two. Across the twilight lawn, conversation ceased. The boy's touch was feather-light, yet each note rang clear, carrying the hush upwards to where evening swallows weep. When the closing chord faded, an uncanny resonance lingered, an aftersound blooming from the soundboard, though no finger remained upon the keys. A collective shiver, then applause rolled forward. Gentle as surf, Rebecca bent close to the twins. Voice, "She's here, in the chord you held, in Gabriel's steady pulse, in Michael's fearless grin." Sarah, standing with Tom at the back, clasped his hand. "Family," she said, "isn't built by blood alone. It's made note by note, heart by heart." Above them, the night accepted the word like a promise, and the old manor, once bruised by secrets, hummed its agreement. A dwelling finely tuned to love's key signature. Scarlet sumac, gold-tipped cottonwoods, a persistent scent of apple skins warming on the orchard's south wall. Gabriel, now tall enough to reach the top shelves without a stool, called it composer weather, air so crisp it seemed to ring with its own hidden chord. On one such afternoon, he and Michael declared the music room off-limits to grown-ups. Rebecca, amused, surrendered the Steinway willingly, though she peeked through the keyhole often enough to catch flashes of their secret game. They called it archaeological composition, rifling through dusty tune fragments, challenging each other to finish phrases left decades dormant. Gabriel spun a random glissando, and a faint metallic rasp sounded beneath the fallboard. The twins froze. When they repeated the slide, the rasp replied. Something, clearly, was wedged inside the piano. They summoned Tom, who removed the lower panel, and after some gentle coaxing, unearthed a blue leather notebook flattened between soundboard and frame. Inside lay sketches of melody, ink faded to smoke, and a single line in Lila's unmistakable hand, "White Mare's Waltz. For the day my children finished the dance, I could not." Rebecca entered on quiet feet, hand drifting to her mouth. She left it for them to complete. She whispered. Gabriel's eyes shone. Michael whispered, awed. "We're supposed to finish Mom's song." 10 years had passed since Rosewood Hollow reopened its doors. Rebecca insisted the finale belonged to the twins. Over cocoa dark evenings, Gabriel penciled main themes drawn from Lila's fragment. A prancing equine bass line, a soaring trio evoking wind across meadows. Michael, ever the architect, scored counter melodies and timed the modulations, giggling when his brother's ear caught errors before his eyes did. Sarah watched nightly, lamp glow pooling on manuscript paper like golden syrup. She warmed milk, reminded them to stretch wrists, but mostly listened, Odd that the hush once ruling this house was now filled with fearless sound. A week before the concert, Rebecca presented 2 small boxes. In Gabriel's lay Solace's silver pendant, the embossed white horse newly polished. In Michael's, a wooden tie clip carved with Lila in swirling script. They bowed before Lila's portrait, Gabriel whispering, "For Mom and for her white mare." The new recital hall, an airy glass nave grafted onto Rosewood Hollow's eastern flank, filled with neighbors, donors, former foster kids. Strings of bulbs twinkled overhead like low-sailing constellations. When house lights dimmed, Gabriel and Michael stepped center stage. They linked pinkies, long-standing talisman, bowed as one, and took their places on the polished bench. Silence rippled outward, until even the cicadas seemed to hush. The opening measures whispered, a gentle canter in 3/4, left-hand chords like distant hoofbeats, right-hand melody tracing arcs of moonlit pasture. Audience shoulders melted. At the midpoint, Gabriel paused, fingers hovering. A hush deeper than silence flooded the hall. He looked sideways, not at Michael, not at the keys, but toward a space just behind him, as though awaiting someone late to rehearsal. And then a third piano voice sounded, delicate, crystalline, threading seamlessly between the brothers' parts. Gasps scattered through the seat. No human sat at any auxiliary keyboard. The sound rose directly from the Steinway, strings humming beneath untouched ivories. Sarah felt her breath stop. Edna, frail now but sharp, murmured, "Play, child." Gabriel picked up the next phrase. Michael answered. The unseen voice wove counterpoint, bright and sure. Rebecca rose slowly, tears turning stage lights to prisms. As the waltz reached its closing variation, dawn silver chords sailed toward pianissimo. At that instant, a stray sunbeam, improbably strong for near evening, pierced the skylight, staining the portrait of Lila at the hall's rear gallery. Next to her, Solace's white form in the photograph caught the same light. The mayor's mane appeared to flutter. From somewhere high overhead, a single dried wildflower petal, curled tawny with age, drifted earthward. It pirouetted onto Michael's score. He touched it tenderly and whispered, "Permission granted." The brothers laid down the finale, a brief accelerando that resolved in a luminous E major chord they held, until sympathetic resonance filled every corner. The silent partner sounded one last high A, like a bird carried by final updraft, then faded. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved. Then applause burst, raw and jubilant, tears and laughter colliding. The ovation lasted longer than the piece. When it ebbed, one soft residual tone tremored from the piano, as though the instrument exhaled. Rebecca leaned to Tom. Solace delivered them to Lila. Tonight, Lila returned to dance with her sons. Outside, night had cleared to reveal a lone star. Gabriel tilted his head, pendant fleshing, and spoke softly into the vaulted hush. "Good night, Mom. We finished it for you. And perhaps because stories are keen to answer such honesty." A faint tremolo drifted through the hall, wood settling, strings cooling, or a mother's pride. But it was music just the same, promising that some songs once born cannot end. Richard Kane's arrival at Pinecrest Recovery Center did not resemble the hush-hush entries of celebrities or financiers that sometimes made local gossip columns. There were no photographers, no entourage. A single law enforcement van rolled through the gates at dawn beneath an Idaho sky, the color of wetted steel. Richard stepped out in cuffs, rain beating on the shoulders of the last tailored suit he would wear for years. A corrections officer guided him beneath a covered walkway that smelled of cedar and disinfectant. The lobby security camera caught the moment the officer clipped the cuffs, removed Richard's Rolex, and dropped it into an evidence bag. The watch hit the plastic with a soft thud, an expensive heartbeat severed from its wrist. Richard did not protest, though his knuckles whitened around the inventory clipboard he was instructed to sign. Marianne Brooke, Pinecrest's clinical director, greeted him in a gray cardi coat and sneakers. Her handshake was firm but frictionless, as if she refused to let patients cling to her for leverage. "Mr. Kane," she said, pronouncing the name carefully, as if tasting its weight. "Pinecrest is a dual-track facility, medical and restorative. You'll have cognitive therapy, structured labor, and twice a week, music rehabilitation." Richard's eyes lifted at the final term. "I'll require a grand piano, Brooke's smile was small. Music will find you here. Kane, not the other way around. Week 1 pressed over Richard like a laid apron. At 5:30 a.m., a chime rang through the dorm wing. Patients rose for guided meditation in a glass pavilion that overlooked a pine valley bristling with fog. Richard kept his eyes open, fixing them on the horizon while others inhaled. After breakfast came group sessions. 10 men and women seated in a circle of cheap ergonomic chairs, steamed from paper cups of herbal tea, curling into the rafters. When his turn arrived, Richard offered no confession. He spoke instead about quarterly reports and how silence in a boardroom could be leveraged as capital. The counselor, a patient man named Felix, asked gently, "Can silence also become debt?" Richard replied by checking the clock. At 2 p.m., they worked the garden plot. Richard, in ill-fitting linen scrubs, kneeling beside a veteran named Eli, whose hands trembled until they wrapped around a trowel. Soil lodged beneath the former tycoon's manicured nails. He imagined shareholders recoiling. By 7 p.m., residents gathered for creative therapy. A battered Martin guitar passed clockwise. When it reached Eli, the veteran strummed a pastoral folk ballad called Homeward Bound. The chords were minor, weighted with longing. Richard felt his throat cinch. He stood abruptly and left. In the hallway, his chest tight, pulse banging in his ears. A nurse slid a dissolvable pill under his tongue and whispered, "Panic's a bully. Sir, don't let it choose your exits." Brooke met him the next morning outside the greenhouse. "You're trying to starve the part of you that hurts," she said. "Trouble is, pain's a survivalist. It eats memories to stay alive. We'll give it something healthier." Music therapy day. A circular room paneled in pale birch. Skylight crosshatched with steel cables. Instruments lined the walls. Djembes, chimes, rain sticks, and in the center, a mute upright piano, whose varnish had fractured into river maps of amber and ivory. 10 patients formed a ring. The therapist, Keisha, invited each to strike a single tone expressing present emotion. A young woman named Maya shook seed pods, anger disguised as rattlesnake tail. Eli plucked an open G on a ukulele, eyes shining with unshed apology. When the piano stool scraped across the hardwood, all murmuring ceased. Richard's, his fingers hovered, as if remembering the chill of another keyboard decades and lifetimes ago. He pressed an E major triad. The chord rang bright, unsparing. In its resonance, he saw Lila leaning against a backstage doorway, laughter in the tilt of her head. The vision dissolved, and Richard's vision tunneled. He toppled sideways. Orderlies rushed him to the infirmary. Between ragged breaths, he muttered, "The music, it means to kill me." Keisha visited later, voice gentle but implacable. "Music isn't a weapon, Mr. Kane. It's a mirror." Wardock Brooke approached him 2 days later with a sealed MP3 player and noise-canceling headphones. "Chord evidence," she explained. "A recording of Lila Harper's final rehearsal. Your homework. Listen, then write what you feel. Refusal prolongs closed status." Richard accepted with a tremor of disgust. In his room, he sat on the bunk, thumb poised above play. When the first arpeggio blossomed, time kinked. He was back at the riverside, wicker basket shoving against current, twin cries tearing through fog louder than water. Lila's lullaby seeped into that nightmare, scoring it with a tenderness that shredded him from the inside. He tore off the headphones, gagged, then forced them on again. 42 measures. He played them 3 times, then picked up the stubby pen issued to patients too distraught for ink, and wrote. Every note is a clock hand turning backward, erasing zeros from bank ledgers until only guilt remained. The 5th week found Richard in the recreation hall, when Maya suffered a flashback triggered by thunder outside. She clawed her hair, sobbing. Staff scrambled, but Richard, without thinking, slid onto the piano bench and began a circular progression. A 6. The melody was simple, tender. Maya's breathing slowed. Her sobs melted into hiccups. Keisha watched, eyebrows raised. Afterwards, she pulled Richard aside. "Next Friday is duet night. Would you lead?" "I owe the composer more than silence," Richard said, surprising himself. Thursday midnight. Fluorescent stripes undulated across the dorm ceiling. Richard sat at the tiny desk, letter paper ghost white under the lamp. The words unfurled like unraveling silk. "Dear Rebecca, Gabriel and Michael, if you ever play that song again, remember that a man once tried to drown it, and the melody forgave him long before he forgave himself. I have little left, just shares in companies that cannot measure worth the way a lullaby can. But they are. If pennies from my empire can fund your mother's foundation, let them. Music survives. Children, be kinder to it than I was. He signed, folded, and sealed. Brooke promised the envelope would pass legal review before forwarding. Duet night flooded Pinecrest's common wing with anticipation. Residents strung cheap paper lanterns. Someone brewed cocoa that smelled like autumn festivals. Keisha introduced Richard and Maya to mild applause. He began the bass of White Mare's waltz, hands steady despite the micro-tremor. Maya answered on wind chimes and small glockenspiel, her part tracing the melody Gabriel and Michael had premiered months earlier. Other patients joined, Eli on soft guitar strums, a retiree tapping Kajan heartbeat. As the final cadence dissipated into hush, Richard closed his eyes. Behind the lids, Lila did not accuse. She smiled, relieved, perhaps, that the melody had finally been given back to the world. That same evening on the opposite side of the Bitterroot Range, Gabriel practiced the waltz in Rosewood Hollow's music room. Mid-phrase, he paused. A tremor vibrated through the keys beneath his fingertips as though someone elsewhere had struck the same chord on the same brand of piano. He looked at Michael, who lounged on the rug with sheet music. Maybe he's learning, Gabriel said. Michael considered, then nodded. Every note has a place to go home to, even the wrong ones. Lights out at Pinecrest. Richard lay in the dark. The waltz's closing figure, echoing like rain on a tin roof. The walls no longer felt like a cage, but like the inside of a resonant chamber, a place where sound could grow wings. He whispered into the dark, perhaps to Lila, perhaps to the twins, perhaps to the boy he had once been at stage door awe. Music wasn't in prison. I was far away. A nightingale began to sing into Idaho darkness, threading its call through pine needles and barbed wire alike, reminding whoever cared to listen that every dawn starts as a single note breaking silence. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. We'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know your favorite part. If you enjoyed the journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories like this one. And don't miss out. Hit the notification bell so you're always updated on our latest content. Your support truly means the world to us. As dawn broke over the misty riverbanks, Tempest stood tall and silent beside the resting twin. Thaddeus held his breath, watching Alara cradle them with a fierce, maternal grace. The current that once carried pain now shimmered with redemption. This was no longer a story of cruelty. It was a story of miracles, of the untamed, of survival. Alara looked up, her eyes full of something neither rage nor sorrow, but a quiet, invincible strength. And in that moment, Thaddeus knew, no one escapes their past, but some rise above it.